Good morning. My name is Joseph Brooks, and I serve as the Senior Director for Donor Services at the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. On behalf of all of my GMF colleagues, we are grateful for your partnership and all of the ways that you serve your organizations and serve our community. So thank you so much for joining us this morning for this agency endowment seminar entitled An Honest Conversation on Becoming an Anti-Racist Organization. So to formally start the program this morning, it is my pleasure to introduce Greg Wesley, GMF board member and Senior Vice President for Strategic Alliances and Business Development at the Medical College of Wisconsin. So Greg, passing it to you.
Good morning. Welcome to an honest conversation on becoming an anti-racist organization brought to you by the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. I'm Greg Wesley, board member for the Greater Milwaukee Foundation and Senior Vice President of Strategic Alliances and Business Development at the Medical College of Wisconsin. I'm glad you could join us for this event, which is aimed at supporting the Foundation's agency endowment partners in their own unique and necessary journeys to discuss power and become more inclusive and welcoming organizations. We're here to set the stage for candid, productive, and honest conversations that you can carry back to your network in a way that motivates and encourages your colleagues and leadership to continue this necessary work. The reason I call this work necessary is self-evident. According to the 2020 census, the city of Milwaukee lost nearly 3% of its population over the last 10 years. Though the city is at its lowest population since 1930, its primary population growth occurred in the Asian and Hispanic communities. I should also mention that for the 2020 census in the city of Milwaukee, 39% of residents identified as African American, 19% identified as Latino or Hispanic, and over 4% identified as Asian. This makes the city what some people refer to as a majority minority city, which means that our families, our workplaces, and our neighborhoods have become increasingly more diverse, and we must embrace everyone so that they experience Milwaukee as a place to build careers and raise families. 20 years ago, the Foundation took its first steps to offer staff training and educational opportunities to address privilege, racial inequality, and other topics to better understand how race intersects across the work of the Foundation. In 2016, under the leadership of Ellen Gilligan, the Foundation Board approved a generational commitment to racial equity and inclusion that would impact all of the work of the Foundation. Though the Foundation has learned many things on the anti-racist journey that began decades ago, the most significant learning is to approach the process with humility. REI work is a process of continuous improvement. Time and space for learning and dialogue are key. No one step or process will unlock success. However, embedding the work in every aspect of the organization is the only path to improvement. As a Foundation board member and a member of the senior leadership team at the Medical College of Wisconsin, I would also like to say that a transparent commitment from organizational leadership and board members is a key step in the journey. While individual stories are important and each of you should feel that your voice matters, collective voices and collective action matter more in terms of providing momentum for enduring systemic change. And now I would like to introduce you to Kenyatta Sinclair, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the Greater Milwaukee Foundation, who will share some of the tools of the journey. Kenyatta was born and raised in Milwaukee and has more than 15 years of experience in the nonprofit and racial equity and inclusion space. You're in good hands today with someone who values education and learning. Kenyatta holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Management of Communications from Concordia University. She's completed doctoral coursework in education and leadership for the advancement of learning and service at Cardinal Stritch University, where she also holds a master's degree in management. Among her many achievements, Her current role is a testament to her ability to lead a comprehensive organizational strategy and commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Kenyatta will present and facilitate the remainder of the program. Welcome, Kenyatta.
Good morning, and thank you, Greg. Welcome, everyone. This presentation is a springboard to a deeper conversation. Slides will be shared with everyone post-event. I'll begin by sharing one of my favorite quotes, which is also an expression of the journey to be as we continue our anti-racism efforts in our organizations and in our society. Becoming an anti-racist organization is not a static achievement. It is a lifelong work that you and your colleagues must commit to each and every day. Make sure that the goals you set are understood, measurable, and embodied by everyone, and that every member of your team knows what role they play in achieving these goals. Remind everyone that you are building an essential muscle that will grow stronger with effort and time. There is no shortcut to this work. The only way forward is through. No one can take on challenges like this alone. No individual, no organization, no neighborhood. It will take all of us, which is why the Greater Milwaukee Foundation wants to be a resource to our nonprofit partners through events like this. This work can be arduous and progression can sometimes feel uneven. It is important to honor the progress when it happens and to celebrate the joy as previously marginalized leaders, colleagues, and clients step fully into and realize their authentic role within your organization. Next slide, please. Racism expresses itself in three forms: personal, institutional, and cultural. There is an integral connection between institutional, cultural, and personal work. Understanding and addressing the three expressions of racism are also how we advance anti-racism. Some expressions are more evident than others. Culture is our embedded values, our beliefs, and our norms. Because it is woven into everyday expressions and assumptions, it is often difficult to see where the locks others have kind of come through that way where we can fully participate in society in our operations. They're so deeply embedded in our way of being that sometimes it is very difficult to be able to dissect those and really address them in meaningful ways. At the foundation, we recognize that racism is the fault line running through every system we've built. It runs through our histories, it shapes our systems that we live in today, and behind the disparities we all know too well. No region in the country has more to gain from greater racial equity. It is important to acknowledge that there is no single path to becoming an anti-racist organization, which is why my goal is to transparently share a framework and a starting point. And I know everyone will benefit from our panelists' conversation later in the program, where they will candidly share their perspectives on the work within their own organizations. Next slide, please. Naming the ways in which racism shows up in organizations is an important first step. It is essential to elevating awareness as to how we can shift behaviors and systems to be more inclusive. Beyond naming the characteristics of white supremacy, we must also ask, what processes do we need to interrogate in order to disrupt systems? And what are we responsible for disrupting? And what is our scope of influence in doing so? Next slide, please. Here is the framework that we've been working on and thinking about at the foundation. Reimagine your core mission. Call in more racially diverse leaders and supporters. Engage your network in new approaches to collective impact. Work to reset organizational approaches to diversity into the work so that we might be more proposed or positioned to advance racial equity and inclusion in all we do. We talk about recentering communities. Put those you serve and those who deliver on your mission at the center of all you do. Listen, reflect, take action on solutions that surface. Be accountable and transparent in reporting, intent, impact, and challenges. Remake systems through leadership and research, through investment in learning, through grassroots collaboration, and through a commitment to policy change. Remake the systems that shape the operations and culture of your organization. As I reflect on and name the ways white supremacy plays out in your organization or in our organization, you will start to uncover strategies and opportunities for improvement. This work will challenge the authenticity of your organization's commitment to equity and the ways in which you deliver on your mission. I share this next slide before you around ways in which we might disrupt white supremacist culture. We can go back to the previous slide. I'm still there. That's okay. I wanted to share some of the touchstone points. Disrupting white supremacy culture does take work. You will be uncomfortable. You will have to strive to be flexible. You must understand that this is not an either or proposition. This is a both and, that we are encouraged to be brave. And bravery sometimes is scary. And there are times where we will have to put down our control, our power, so that we can share and really lean into what that means for other folks. That's important to remember, that we have a responsibility to discomfort. We have to have appreciation in learning from others. We have to be willing to share space and hold space so that others can feel that they are a part of this movement. We can't just do it in words. It must also show in our actions. Next slide, please. There are some journey questions that we've been considering here at the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. And if you find these questions helpful, I think those are a good way or a good foundation, or as I like to call them, artifacts, to bring us back to why we do this work and why this work is important. The racist equity, this journey is aspirational and it requires humility. Those have to be at the grounding places of everything we do. We will always have to learn and unlearn. We can never think we've arrived. It didn't take a year or two for us to get here. It took over 400 years for us to construct the systems in which we live in now. Deconstruction is not a small feat. So some of the questions we consider are, what and how will the organization advance its generational commitment to racial equity? How will we know? What work are we doing now and in our ongoing plans to move closer to being an anti-racist organization? When we think about that individual place, or what I like to call soul work, what knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs do we aspire to shift at an individual level, at an institutional level, at a cultural level? What systems will we dismantle? And what is our focused work to help dismantle those systems? Just some questions that I invite you to consider as you go on this journey. Next slide, please. Aspirations to becoming an anti-racist organization. I will continue to express humility has to be at the foundation of that. Organizational readiness is essential, and we must be intentional. We can't sort of retrofit this work into strategies that have already been created. We need to go in, if our goal is to truly embed and show up as anti-racist organizations, we have to be intentional about our plans, our strategies, our work, folks who will be doing the work. Humility and patience, measured with grace, are key in honoring everyone's unique contribution and setting the tone that invites partnership. We want true partnership in this work. We need true partnership in this work. As I said at the beginning, we cannot do this alone. And so therefore we must be willing to hold space, relinquish power, create space for folks to feel a sense of belonging and that what they bring is valued. Take advantage of opportunities for quick success and celebrate briefly what may seem small progress when it happens. We don't want to celebrate too long and forget that we have more work to do. Remember that lived experiences vary. No one is an anti racist expert. That is important. That is a part of that humility. The people in your organization that are there, the ones that we serve, they have valuable perspectives in motivating and guiding your anti-racist work. Invite their experience, not only invite their experience, but actually listen to them and find ways to integrate their perspectives, their ideas, and opinions into the work. Bring your board and organizational members along in developing strategy, policies, and key messages. Power sharing and shifting is vital. And last but not least, remember to close the communication loop so that your network knows you hear their feedback and you took action. I appreciate that. Next slide, please. I want to bring in our panelists and give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. I'm honored to be here with them and would like to have them each introduce themselves in the following order: Glenna, Kanisha, Justin, Dr. Greer, and Benjamin. And then we'll go a little bit further.
Thanks so much, Kenyatta. My name is Glenna Holstein. I'm the membership manager at the Urban Ecology Center, and I'm also part of our Equity, Dignity, and Justice team there. If there are folks who are tuning in that are not seeing us for whatever reason, I'm a white woman with short brown hair and brown eyes, and I got a dimple on one side. So that's what I look like.
Good morning, everyone, and hello to the fellow panelists. My name is Kanisha Phelps. I am the Director of Learning and Talent, I'm the Director of Talent Management and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Milwaukee. I'm very happy to be here. For those who cannot see me, picture Beyonce, no. For those who cannot see me, I am an African-American, belovedly Black woman with brand new blonde highlights, glasses, and a purple dress.
Divine Rising, beautiful humans. I'm Justin Roby. I have the pleasure of serving as the Director of HIV Care for Diverse and Resilient. For those of you who are joining without visual aids, I am an out queer Black man with long locks, African American as well.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Greer Jordan. I serve as Vice President for Inclusion and Diversity at the Medical College of Wisconsin. I'm also Assistant Professor in the Institute for Health and Equity at the Medical College. And for those of you who would like more hints as to my appearance, I have salt and pepper, dark hair, short cropped in a style called sister locks. I have a toffee colored complexion normally. Right now it's kind of pale after the Wisconsin winter. And I have worn glasses since second grade.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Benjamin Porter. I'm a 35-year-old white male with brown hair. I'm wearing a blue suit jacket and a white plaid shirt-ish. I'm the Health and Health Equity Program Officer at the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. And I'm also privileged to sit on the Culture Committee where we seek to advance this work. So grateful to be here.
Welcome again to all of our panelists. I don't know if I describe myself, but I am an African-American woman. I am wearing red glasses, red pearls. Black, which is my favorite color, and listen to the sound of this voice. And so I want to start with a couple questions, and I'll give each of our panelists an opportunity to answer. So in 45 seconds or less, two-part question. If you had to describe where your organization is on the anti-racist continuum, where would you say you are? Part two of that question is, where do you think folks that you serve would say you are? And if you would like to answer that in the same order in which you introduced yourself, that would be awesome. If you have forgotten the order in which you introduced yourself, we will go Glenna, Kanisha, Justin, Dr. Greer, and Benjamin.
I just remember Justin. Justin, you're my lead. So
Great. Well, thank you. I would say that the Urban Ecology Center is at kind of the gaining confidence in our plan and approach stage. That was one of the prompts you offered us, Kenyatta, I think. But it's not exactly linear. I think some days I really feel like we're moving toward the fully committed, in it to win it, and other days I feel like more like we're in the just in the false starts and moving forward. So it's really not linear, but I do feel like we're in that kind of gaining confidence stage. We serve a really diverse audience in all senses of that word, and so I think it really depends on who you ask how our community would say we're doing. Painting in pretty broad strokes, I think some of our more like white progressive members would tell you like, yeah, they're killing it, they're ahead of the curve, while some of our more conservative folks would tell you we're totally off the deep end. And then some of the Black and Brown folks we serve, as well as some of our staff, would tell you, I think, just that we have a really long way to go. So I think so depending on who you ask, it would be a little bit different, and it's a non-linear process. So that I think makes sense.
Great question. My role is actually new. The good thing about it being new is that it was identified as a role that was needed at the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Milwaukee. So with me being there less than a year, I would honestly say we are in the very, very early stages of moving past just being okay with being diverse and starting to look at anti-racism as a framework that's actually happening in an organization that does great things. So we're in the early stages, and I believe that when I think about the people I serve, which are the staff, I think they would agree that we're in the early stages. They've been very vocal about letting me know what I should be looking at and helping guide them along. But when I think about our members, which are the youth that actually attend a Boys and Girls Club site, I would imagine they have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. And so I appreciate the question, because even as I think of my role, it's not that I've left the youth out of it. I'm just really focused on, we could trickle this all down to how we serve youth, but our house is not in order right now. And so my start is not the youth, it's not our members, it's actually internally happening inside of our home.
Great question. So I've been enthused to be as diverse and resilient throughout this process. It's something that I kind of joined in the middle of. So I think we are past the contemplation. We are definitely kind of fixing the finalized infrastructure of being an anti-racist organization. Just in full transparency, we're conducting a search to replace our president and CEO with the intentions of hopefully bringing in a person of color to run our organization. This process has been going on for the last 5 or 6 years, which has included bringing a diverse board member, a diverse group of board members to the board, including hiring diverse leaders in leadership positions. So me and my peers formerly were people of white descent, but are now currently officers of color. It's a beautiful kind of change and growth that has been going on inside of diverse and resilient. As you see us consistently attack white supremacy and the ways that it can show up in the policies that we make and the things that we do and the edicts that we come out with, and even throughout our communication. So we continue to want to flatten as an organization. We know that we still have work to do, but I think we are pretty advanced when it comes to this anti-racist organization process.
So I'm listening in here and just thinking about what to add that's sort of different than what I've already heard relative to the Medical College of Wisconsin. I would definitely agree that describing it as a continuum doesn't grasp the complexity of what's going on. I mean, it's really more of an iterative process with people at different stages. And also, the rapidly changing environment around us in the medical college has been a big factor too, just in terms of it's now a we're now having to deal with things on multiple fronts, but the common denominator I think people are starting to understand is that it is racial and various social inequities that are contributing to a lot of the complex problems that we're seeing now. So I think that's helping to galvanize more energy within MCW to focus on moving forward around some of the different tactics and strategies we've had going for a long time. And, as I was listening to this too, I was thinking it might, it's not new. I mean, George Floyd didn't happen and then all of a sudden this came up. I mean, this is what we're looking at now is decades of theorizing, of organizational interventions, of failed best guesses, best practices. So it's really a continuation of something that's been going on. We could trace it back through our history. So we're talking at the organizational level of our journey, but I think it's important to also locate this within a larger societal journey that's been going on for, well, if you read Dr. Kennedy's book, a couple thousand years. So I think that's important when we think about the term of this work. I mean, people think you can put some initiatives in place like you're gonna, address a quality problem. It's that's not what this is. It's really fundamentally about who we are in our organizations and what our missions are and how we really actually going to live into the values and aspirations that we say that we are committed to.
Yeah, and I would say at the foundation, we have done a good job of identifying how racism structures the disparities in our community and setting a generational commitment to addressing racism and, getting out there and saying, like we are here, that we're committed to anti-racism. But I would also say we are at the very, very early stages of institutionalizing that humility that Kenyatta was talking about in terms of what does it look like to be truly anti-racist, both as individual employees and in our processes, like Justin mentioned. And so, the institutionalization of the anti-racism, as has been mentioned, is a perpetual practice and one in which we are just starting out and have, like folks have mentioned, plenty of growth to go. There's no end to the growth that we can seek, right? And then, I think in terms of how our community sees us, I get a lot of feedback about how great it is that we are focusing on the racism that defines our systems. But it's also a little putting the cart before the horse, right? Because Milwaukee is a community that suffers tremendous racist disparities. And so, evaluating our anti-racism is maybe a little early in the game in terms of, how they perceive us.
I appreciate all of your answers, and I'm sitting here bubbly because I'm like, yes, 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 and yes, and it is a forever practice. And as Dr. Greer said, we have to go back to understand that this is not new. A lot of folks maybe just became woke in 2020, which is, you know, beyond me, but so it is. But we have under the work that we're doing as practitioners will not be done in our lifetime. I always tell folks who are on this journey, I'm going to do what I can while I'm here, and hopefully it will make it a little less arduous for those who pick up the work after we're gone off the scene. But the fact that we have these aspirations and that we apply pressure in ways that we make sure that if we say we're about this movement of change, we have to make sure we stand in the gap and do everything we can in that way. And I hear that from each and every organization, whether you think you're just beginning, whether you think you're in the middle, where you think, some days you make strides. And I like to say that because this is human work, folks backslide. So one day you can be talking to folks and they're like full speed ahead, and then something happens, life happens, a tragedy happens. Anything could happen that then pushes them back in a way where we have to just keep pushing to make sure that we don't stop the work if this is our aspiration. So I want to point this next question specifically to Justin and Dr. Greer. And I will give other panelists opportunities to answer if you want to add something after the two of them have finished. In terms of organizational readiness, what is needed and what was your organization's process?
I can go first. So as far as readiness, there has to be a readiness for some uncomfortability because some of the conversations will be uncomfortable. It takes some reckoning to go through and to say like, yeah, that might not have been the best for people of color. So there has to be some reckoning with the dissonance that our actions sometimes can be oppressive. That our systems that we've created can be oppressive. And then we need, at least at DNR, we took the perspective of an outside consulting firm to help us really identify how deep our white supremacy was. We thought because we had people of color in leadership that like we had been rooting out most of it. But that third party critical eye helped us identify more areas where we were able to grow and more areas where racism was showing up and white supremacy was still leading. And so it takes that openness to that uncomfortability and that openness to understand that you could be part of the problem as a person of color doing the work, right? And so we need to continuously be doing that introspective, internal, like assessing of what we're doing, how our actions are coming out, and what is our outcomes, and do they align with what our intentions are. So it takes, again, that grit, but to be prepared, to be ready to have those uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, in terms of readiness, it kind of alludes to my earlier comments. It wasn't like 2020 came along and then all of a sudden. So the groundwork for my work really started at least decades ago. I've only been with the medical college for 5 years and trying to read and grasp some of the history. But there were people who came into roles before I came into my role that were trying to address disparities in attendance in medical school and doing small local efforts. There have been faculty there's an urban and communities pathways program that has been in place for a long time to teach medical students how to be care providers in urban settings and really understand the complexity of some of these issues around the impact of racism. So that groundwork was already there. And and there were some failures. There were some notable failures. And I think one condition for readiness in organizations is to see that something's not working. So that readiness, I think, aroused around these disparate efforts that were going on and the realization that this isn't working. We're not getting the impact that we want. So I think that realization that you're not getting the impact you want, you're not getting the results you want, but you're committed to those results is that fundamental foundation for readiness.
Thank you both. Any other of the panelists? I saw some head nodding. We do have an opportunity for you to weigh in. I see Kanisha's hand, and Glenna, Benjamin, you want to weigh in as well? You can just nod to me if you do. Kanisha, go ahead.
As I'm looking at myself in Boys and Girls Clubs Greater Milwaukee, the number one thing for me of thinking about readiness is that we have to be ready to tell the truth, because we can't fix a lie. And not necessarily saying we are purposely lying, but as I think about this journey and this work, we have to have an honest conversation about the truth of the state of what's happening inside of our organization, and not just the truth. Um, I feel like sometimes the truth comes out because it's what you believe in your heart. Justin talked about dissonance, right? So in my heart, because I know this is where we're aspiring to go as an organization, it's hard to really say the truth because I know where I want the outcome to be will look different. And so when I think of readiness, it's just like, no, we have to tell the truth. And I have to know if the truth I'm telling is rooted in bias or my own privilege. And I just think that's one of the most critical pieces to readiness, and being okay saying, you know what? Yeah, we thought we were ready, but maybe we're not. And so now what has to happen? Because that also will leave people with a sour taste in their mouth when you aspire to be ready and you say you are, but you're not. And so even in my role, I have to say, people will say things to me all the time, and I'll say, oh, that probably was really hard to hear, but was it true? And if it was true, let's talk about that. And most oftentimes, what they heard, what they felt, it was the truth. And if you're not ready to address that truth, we're not ready. Just wanted to add.
Thank you. Benjamin, Glenna, any additional comments? Glenna?
Yeah, I really appreciate what everybody has said so far. And I can also imagine, someone sitting in the audience and thinking like, well, I'm ready to tell the truth. I'm ready to have conversations that are difficult and dismantle white supremacy, but I don't know if my organization is, and what do I do then? And I just wanted to share a perspective of that it's ideal if your whole organization is ready, you're going to make more progress and the work is going to be smoother. But if your organization's not ready, that doesn't mean don't do anything. I think starting where you are is a really valuable is a really valuable tool as well. I think in my experience there was a group of us maybe 10 years ago that we're trying to start something like what we have now as an equity, dignity, and justice committee, but there just wasn't an appetite for that at our organization at that time. So we started a multicultural learning group because that was what felt like people were kind of ready to handle at the time. And then we just started pushing, and I think whatever people's comfort zone is in a moment, it can always change. And so I think starting where you are is really important too. And it can be really discouraging, if you're feeling like your organization isn't ready. And there are always things that you can do. So I just wanted to add in that as well.
Thank you. Benjamin?
I'll just briefly lift up, that readiness is also tied to the interconnection of our organizations, the larger systems that they're working within. And so, when we live in a society where people are debating whether or not systemic racism exists, readiness is also tied to where we all are, because if we're going to get to a place of true equity, of anti-racism, it will be all of our organizations and all the people that make them up that get us there. And so that readiness is an interconnected concept as well.
Great additions. I appreciate that. And it does lead me into my next question, which I'm specifically pointing to Glenna, Kanisha, and Benjamin. But as always, if folks want to add in their commentary afterward, I'm going to make the space for that because that's important in the journey as well. So Glenna, Kanisha, and Benjamin, in what ways does humility show up in your work, and or how do you promote it?
I appreciate this question so much, and I just appreciate the focus on humility in this whole program. I think it just highlights how critical that humility is to anti-racism work. None of us is perfect. None of us is ever going to stop making mistakes. So starting from that place of acceptance of that fact and figuring out how you'll respond when, not if, but when you make those mistakes is just so important. So I just appreciate that we're focusing on that. I think the kind of the two approaches maybe that I'd highlight from the Urban Ecology Center are really trying to listen for feedback from all sides, and trying to accept and appreciate and adjust when that feedback comes, and then acknowledging that we're not experts often. So in terms of listening for feedback, maybe just a couple examples. There was a time when we were facilitating some processing spaces from an event that had happened, and the BIPOC folks on the planning team really advocated for separate processing spaces for people of color and white folks. And so we kind of rolled that out. And then there were some people of color in our organization that were not on the planning committee, but felt some kind of way about that. And so I was grateful to them that they reached out and said, hey, I didn't like that was how we did that. It didn't feel good to me. And so in that instance, the approach that I tried to use was to really invite that conversation, sincerely apologize for that unintended impact, also acknowledge the additional effort that person was putting in to give me that feedback. Feedback is a gift, no matter how it comes. And so we had a really productive conversation. I think we both learned, or we all learned a lot. And so just that, trying to really be grateful for feedback when it comes. And then, like I said, really trying to acknowledge that we aren't experts. Saying that out loud a lot is really important. I think for us, we're in an interesting position in kind of the nature center world. It's a field that's, broadly speaking, very dominated by whiteness, and so in a lot of ways, Urban Ecology Center is seen as ahead of the curve or a leader because we work in urban spaces with Black and Brown folks. And so we often are kind of approached by other nature centers, trying to learn from us. And that's awesome that people are wanting to learn. And I always try to make it really clear that we don't have everything figured out. We're always willing to share what we've learned, including our missteps. But we're always trying to invite folks to learn with us, not necessarily from us in that way. So just that acknowledgement that we're not experts, I think, is an important way that humility shows up as well.
For me, when I think about humility in this work, the first thing I try to do is just model it. True story. Before I even started my first day, because I knew I had the position and I knew that the DEI director piece of my job was going to be larger than the director of talent management piece of my job, I had the whole plan laid out. They need this. We're going to do this. And first, I'm going to do this. I'm going to implement this. It was laid. I was getting paid and I wasn't even on the clock yet for the job. And when I stepped into my position, I really had to take a step back, and I had to admit that I had already laid out the blueprint for where we were going to go and where we were going to start based on my own bias of what I think people need to do when they're serving Black and Brown kids. And so that was the first thing, like really admitting, like, yeah, you know what, I had a plan. But it was a Kenesha plan, and that's not going to best serve this organization. So admitting that, and then honestly, so I started July 26th of last year, and I actually did not do anything until this year because I sat back and listened, and I interviewed people, and I watched behaviors, and I listened for what people didn't say, and I watched who speaks up and who doesn't. And then I got curious and asked people why they don't speak up, and encourage people to speak up. So the first thing is really I modeled it, because it's very easy as a DEI practitioner to make the show about what you want. And I always have to constantly realize, even on my most frustrated days, I'm on a different leg of life journey around equity, understanding racism and systems, and other people are not there. And I have to recognize that there are some people further along than I am in my organization. Also understanding my place as, I'm using air quotes, expert, right? That I have to humbly inquire all day long. So I have to get curious to understand people's perspective. And I think I demonstrate humility the more I ask questions. And, honestly, I do a lot of, people probably don't like it, but I do a lot of, thank you for sharing that. What do you want me to do? Did you just tell me this to listen? Did you tell me this to build a plan? Or you need a hug? Do you need a cheerleader? What do you want me to do with that information to demonstrate that this is not my job alone, that we all have to be a part of this. I'm very mindful that I have to help create and craft this journey for our organization, but it's not just my job. And I vocally say that quite often, that this just doesn't belong to me. How are we going to infuse this into everybody's role here? Um, and, and involve people so that we're not infusing it into everyone's role without involving the people. So yeah, lots of listening, lots of watching.
Those are excellent comments, and I think about humility very similarly, and would add, that we don't know what anti-racism will look like in our society. We've never had it, right? We've always had systems built on racism and white supremacy, and so. If we believe that those systems are built on mental models or ideologies or root causes, right? If we empower oppressed voices, we're going to have different ideologies and mental models and we'll produce different systems. So, staying humble in the face of what the world can look like when we are not operating from a place of racism and being willing to roll with that, I think is an exercise in humility and emergence. And then, I think being really honest about the ways that I, as an individual, perpetuate racist systems, right? Like, I do believe that, behaviors are by and large systems outputs, but that doesn't abdicate me from, being a participant, right? And so, really being willing to say, hey, I'm a privileged white guy that is sitting on this panel for, just racist systems outputs, right? Like that I'm willing to like own the ways in which I chose to, take advantage of my privilege for my advanced degrees, or that I, took an inheritance from my grandmother who passed a couple weeks ago, and really just not seeing myself as distinct from the systems that I would like to change, but as part and parcel of them, and my own internal work to align my day-to-day value, like behavior and the way that I carry myself in relationship and community and internally with those goals, as and seeing the hypocrisy there between that kind of those ideas and the reality, and be humble about what that hypocrisy means to the way that I carry myself through my days.
I appreciate all the comments, and I'm nodding my head. I'm going to give Dr. Greer and Justin an opportunity if you want to add anything to this question.
Yeah, I'll just add, so I work for the medical college, which inherently is a group of experts. So, so you have a professional identity built on expertise. I'm a former engineer. So it's expertise. You're supposed to get in there and you're supposed to solve problems. And I think the humility journey, if you will, that folks like me have to struggle with is that you have this professional identity, you're supposed to be competent and solve problems. But when you're talking about a complex system problem, you have to involve a whole lot more people and you have to step back out of your expertise sometimes. And that I will come back. I mean, I came up in that system of expertise. So I had to really struggle with that myself. Um, Years of training, years, years of rehabilitation for recovering engineer work. And Kanisha's point about that curiosity, really cultivating that curiosity. And the other thing I'll say though is that it is important though sometimes to go through a learning. Sometimes humility comes, real expertise is knowing that you don't know. And sometimes one has to go through a lot of learning to get to that point of, gosh, I'm never going to know all this. And so it's just I think that's kind of been our journey of like people go very smart, go read a bunch of stuff, go do some things, and then realize, gosh, I'm never going to know all this. Now I've got to work with others.
So I wanted to build on a few of the pieces. So starting where you are and like not being the subject matter expert, that's like perfect. That's how I springboarded into this work. Um, I came from Boys and Girls Clubs, and I remember the best thing I could get started was the inclusivity task force. But it was like the best thing ever because we was having those conversations, we were pushing the needles, we were starting like it was well before the George Floyd incident. But now to see they have a DEI director, like that shows that if you start the conversation, it will continue to build. We are supposed to be doing this work for the next generation to benefit from, and so that's the real cause. So I really love that piece, and then I also enjoyed remembering to be humble as a person who I grew up in Milwaukee. I grew up directly impacted. You know, I was low income. I had a mother who was drug impacted. You know, and so as I got educated and entered into these spaces, it's always reminding people that the folks who we directly want to impact have not been invited to the table. And we don't know their experiences legit. Like we are trying somehow to conceptualize what it is to be a poor Black person in Milwaukee in our spaces. And we need better ways of understanding. And so that's where that humility really comes in at, is being able to authentically share who we are and accept and be empathetic with the experience and fight of others as we move forward with these conversations. So yeah.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate all the comments, and I'm thinking about Dr. Greer. That becomes our unlearning, right? When you are even when I think about how consultants come in, we're expected to give a set of recommendations. We're diagnosing. Like there is nothing about our work to say we should leave this unfinished or tell people, I don't know. So, so that is an unlearning that really, and for most of us, if you came through higher education, it was always about being the best and to be able to be someone who, if we called you in, we called you in because you're a fixer, you're a problem solver, and to know that this work is so messy and non-linear and we're learning more all along. It's hard to say, I don't know. But that is what humbles me every day. And so I appreciate this conversation and believe that this is a way that if we embrace that, we will be okay. Because we have to make sure that we don't get in our own way as we do this work. And so that truth telling starts with us telling the truth to ourselves that I'm a little up in age now. There's no way I don't have the attention span anymore. So even if I wanted to go that same route, I'm not going to be able to do it. So I appreciate that. I want to pose this next question, really kind of talking about those failures, those ups and downs, how we learn from them, to Dr. Greer and to Justin. How does your organization measure impact?
Well, I can start. So we're trade off. um, so it's been quite a process of getting around to measuring impact. You know, when I first came upon the role, we were tracking what I call um, outputs. So the number of African Americans or Native Americans or those, to me, those are outputs. What you have to be curious about, and this is my engineering head coming in. So if you're getting this output and it's not the output you want, something's happening upstream. So getting toward what some of those upstream type measures are, it is still a struggle. We're not set up as organizations sometimes to measure why we're getting certain people outcomes. So as we put together an organizational strategic plan, and people tease me because I'm on every one of the 5 strategic priority workforces, I really work to embed goals in there, either around equity. I focus more on the equity and inclusion piece. And then because of MCW's commitment to the Metropolitan Milwaukee Anchor of Commerce pledge, we do have some diversity outcome pieces. But I thought it was important that you have to have the process actions in place in order to be getting that output. So process measures that we've been using are responsibility of top leaders to create inclusion plans from their institutions. We have an engagement survey that includes some equity measures in it. So with that information about your unit, you can sort of do I thought it was really important that the teams be empowered to look at their data and come up with their solutions. My office provides a menu of ideas, does consulting pieces with them to help them identify what they want to do. So one measure is creation of these plans, number of these plans, and instituting these plans. Then there are other measures, of course, around the outcome pieces. And we have measures around our community engagement piece. We have a supplier diversity plan, so measures in terms of how we're investing back into the community. So those are some examples of how we've started to incorporate those upstream process type measures as well as outcome measures into our institutional plans and goals.
So at Diverse and Resilient, let's talk about pre-pandemic and then during the pandemic and sort of now where we are with this endemic. So pre-pandemic, you can tell there was a real focus on numbers. How many people are we serving and what ways are we serving them and which programs are we serving them? But as the pandemic rolled out, we adjusted focus, right? Because one, we're not able to meet in person. So what are we going to do? And of course, there's always this, we're all getting paid, so we have to do something type of mentality that was sort of aired around. So we pivoted. Now, what needs do we know community members have and how can we best meet those? And so now it's who can we remain connected with? Because this time of isolation and separation it directly impacted our community, particularly the community of people living with HIV, who are now, after already surviving one epidemic, is now trying to survive a pandemic, right? So it was about deepening that connection and ensuring that they knew that they had someone who believed in them, who was going to be there for them and validated their experiences, right? And so then as we now roll into this endemic state, it's about taking those connections that we were able to sustain throughout the pandemic, right? And now deepening them and harnessing them and leveraging those conversations to increase engagement in medical and research care. And we've seen that in our last HIV needs assessment survey, like our constituents engage with us at a higher level than the general community. So that's how we are starting to measure impact, right? We realize that we're able to keep this intimate connection with those around us because of the work that we're able to do. And so we continue to double down on that impact, invest in our team's ability to keep that connection stable, and ensure that that's where we devote our resources and our attention to.
Thank you both very much. I want to allow each of you to respond. I'm going to tell you an order after I ask the question, just to keep us flowing. The question is, in what ways does your organization interrogate and disrupt white supremacist culture? And so we're going to go Glenna, Dr. Greer, Kanisha, Benjamin, and Justin.
Yeah, thank you. These are such good questions. I really appreciate how well you put this whole thing together. I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, I think this is a place where our organization's kind of in that gaining confidence space as opposed to the like really rocking and rolling space. I think we've said out loud in our organizational anti-racism statement. That's part of our strategic plan now that we want to dismantle white supremacy, and using that language I think is an important step, but it is also just a step. Not everyone in our organization is even comfortable yet using that language, but I think it is starting to become more commonplace and more accepted to name white supremacy or colonizer mindset in conversations in our approach, and I think that's progress. was talking with our managing director a few weeks ago and mentioned this disparity in a program that I was noticing, and he immediately responded with something like, "Oh, that's basically colonization." And I was like, "Oh, great!" We're like we were able to just kind of to use that language right away, and I think that language is so important. You know, we won't fix what we won't name, and I think the dismantling of white supremacy is showing up in some new places for us. You know, we now have a land acknowledgement that's being shared in our grant applications, and and anti-racism was intended to be an integral part of the selection for our construction manager for our 2 large capital projects. So there's places where it's moving forward, and I think we're also trying to kind of in more ways that kind of filter throughout our organization. We're trying to push back on some of the characteristics of white supremacy culture, like perfectionism. Trying to be more all right with mistakes and trying things out. Urgency, trying to slow down some of our processes and really give time, space, and structure for complex decision making. Push back on the quantity over quality. We're re-examining some of our purpose and structure and try to evaluate what's the best way to approach this as opposed to how to get the most of something. And then I think that paternalism and power hoarding are another kind of characteristic of white supremacy culture. And I'm proud of our organization for working toward organizational and decision-making structure that's kind of less of a traditional hierarchy and one where decision-making processes are clear for everyone. So we've been working on a circle structure where there are kind of interdepartmental cross-level circles that help with decision-making and goal setting across our organization. And we're still learning. I'll say it again. We're not definitely not experts. Haven't got it all figured out. But that seems like progress, and it's I think it's showing up more and more to be able to push back on that culture.
I'll make an observation. When that slide was presented about, the things that to do to foster an anti-racist institution, and I was reading over that list, it was interesting to me that everything there aligned with ideas from the late 20th century around how we really needed to totally rethink organizations. And it wasn't coming from a race point of view. It was coming from a point of view of the way we're structured, the way our organizations are structured, the way we tell people in business school that the purpose of an organization is for shareholder value add, is not adding anything to sustaining the human race. So there were scholars, practitioners who started to really look at this idea of how do we redesign an organization? How do we rethink organizations? And it's interesting that a lot of the things that we talk about in terms of deconstruction white supremacy is same concepts from that movement. So what that does for me is I don't, with folks who are good intentioned but not ready, not versed in the language, I have different language I could use with them to still move things along. One of the things I think that started initially was this realization that we have to rethink how we think about who's part of the organization. So that's in the hiring processes. We have a caregiver's background check that was misunderstood, generally not applied to certain positions, but not transparent. So I would say that first movement around was going back and saying, what are the barriers? And I don't necessarily have to use a certain language that this HR person who's not versed in this knows about. But if I talk to them about our purpose here is to serve and build up thriving communities. And we have this policy here that's a barrier to that. People got that. During COVID, without me asking, they had already done an analysis of disparate impact of the furloughs. I did a further analysis to show that, wait a minute, we missed people in high poverty and high COVID areas. And we immediately adjusted that policy in terms of who we brought back from work. So it's very getting people to do the grass level things that they have control of. And then they feel great. They're like, okay, now I'm doing something, I think has been key. I don't always use that language of white supremacy. Because some people understand that, some people don't. But if I use that language of, hey, what did we say we're here to do? And as this practice, this policy keep us from um, having that diverse medical school student who can better serve these communities? Does it keep us from seeing the inequities around economics that we need to invest differently in, and people can see what they can do? Then we move forward.
I might be next, but I think somebody else is, and I don't remember. It's me. Okay. I was like, is it Benjamin? Okay. Um, I'll be completely transparent and tell the truth because I'm all about the truth. The question is, in what ways does your organization interrogate or disrupt white supremacy culture? The truth is we don't. We have not yet even begun to be comfortable enough to say white privilege, white supremacy, we are racist, we have bias. So just to be totally honest, the extent of disrupting and interrogating is starting with me and people who come to me who would like to use my loud voice as the vehicle. Like, okay, you got this day, you go say it. So um, we have not yet explored white cultural norms and how they show up in our organization. I have said the words enough. And we are working with our senior leadership team on implicit bias training, where, of course, the words like white supremacy or just the word privilege shows up. So it's coming, but I didn't want to get on this call and lie and say, yes, honey, we disrupt it. We do not. We are scared to acknowledge it still, that it is happening. And so just to be fully transparent, we're still learning that we can say the words are not bad words. They're words for us to learn and unpack and maybe figure out a shared definition for the word. So we're going to, it's just not there yet.
Yeah, no, and to that point, I would say I'm skeptical of any organization that says they are disrupting white supremacy alone, right? Because this is a systems thing. But I do think that we are really trying to institutionalize that humility around this project. As I kind of mentioned, it does start with that naming it and questioning it. So we are really diving into our mission and our desire to become an anti-racist organization. And that takes a lot of different forms. We are lucky enough to have Kenyatta leading us through this work, and she was a relatively recent hire, a year and a couple months maybe. And we do a racial equity movement every week during our team huddle. And yesterday at our board meeting, we started with 15 minutes of REI muscle building. And I have the pleasure of working on a collective impact project that seeks to define how you could advance racial equity and identified policies, representation, and power as kind of cross-sectoral things. And so there's a lot of work that's going on to really try and disrupt white supremacy. But I see it as my role, and I think I have a lot of support in the organization to keep us humble about what that really looks like and how long and complex. And seeing ourself and our own self work as intimately connected to that organizational work. And so I would say we got a lot going on, and we got a lot of humility as well.
Mhm. So this is one of those moments I'm like super proud to be a diverse and resilient again, because of the way we show up and the way we do things. So we currently have a white president and CEO, but he actually gets it as a person. So I always say this is kind of ironic. I found out that though I stayed in the hood my entire life, my boss also stays in the hood. He's like right around the corner from us. So he's a person who not only gets it, he truly gets it. Like he's making sure that when he occupies executive areas, like he's saying, yep, it's time for us to move out the way. We are blocking progress at the executive level, because that's a conversation and how it has to show up. Like we have, and how do we start that process? Get up, move your seat. There are very much capable people of color who can do this work, and that's a part of what happens. And so again, and I'm just going to name Gerald Kuhn, who is our president and CEO, came in and brought people of color to our board. He brought people of color to leadership. He relinquished powers. When we're in our meetings, he's not asserting his position of authority. He's honoring our voices and our experiences. So he's asking us. We had a peer leave, a director leave our organization, which is big for a flat organization with 4 directors. So that's 1/4 of our leadership leaving. So how do we support this? And in one of the suggestions, the directors who remain was like, well, that's centered in white supremacy. We're going to call that out right here in this conversation, in this meeting, very openly and very directly. And Jerry often will sit back and acquiesce to what we say. He honors that if we feel some type of way, it's rooted in something. We're not just going to bring him anything. And that level of humility on his end, knowing he's an executive and knowing he has amazing sources of knowledge and information, and he's very intelligent, but he also knows that there are limits to what he knows, and that he needs to honor those people around him who come with different lived experiences. And that's what makes it an anti-racist system, right? It's not that your system is right or your way is right or your way of thinking is right. We are a collective coming up with a new way, a new essence, and that's how it goes. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I appreciate the passion and just the vigor and the honesty in which questions are being answered. I know that sometimes when we are charged with being a representative for very large organizations, mid-sized organizations, that's a lot of weight to say, oh, I'm going to represent, but that is what we're here for, to have an honest conversation about that. None of us, no matter how long we've been in the work, have it all together, and that we have an undying commitment to keep it going. And so that's what I see exuding through the responses here. And so we have arrived at our last question, 45 seconds or less. I'm going to tell you the order after I ask the question. Becoming an anti-racist organization is a journey. What would you offer by way of encouragement, advice, and/or lessons learned? We're going to start with Justin, go to Glenna, Benjamin, Kanisha, and Dr. Greer.
This is not going to be a perfect journey. Mistakes will be had. Like you will make mistakes. People's feelings will get hurt. And it's important to acknowledge that pain, acknowledge that trauma, apologize when we are the cause or the source of that, and always try to move on and do better. And we talk about that, especially from our organization as an LGBTQ organization. We still have issues of misgendering folks, right? And we learn from each instance, and we have those open and honest conversations. And how can we continue to do better? By just practicing it and moving forward with it, right? Don't let any missteps or mishaps derail your train. There is a serious cost to inaction, inadequate action, or failure to act, to any situation that we have power or purview within. So make sure if this is a task that has been handed to you, you see it through, you stay committed, be okay with those stumbles. And it's about the destination more so than the journey, right?
I love what Justin just said, and I'll underscore how important humility is, and that I think also that perfection can be the enemy of progress, right? That like if you wait until you think you got it perfect, like you're never going to move. So do something. And I think I'll reiterate what I said before of just starting where you are, even if it's not, if you don't feel like your organization is 100% ready, to figure out where you can start and go from there. And then I think I'll just also add something that I feel is just really, really critical for any group trying to do this work together, is really to spend some time together building trust and figuring out how you will work together. Organic evolution of a team and purpose is really great, but if you lay a strong foundation at the beginning, it'll help keep that work moving forward even as folks move in and out. Just a little resource plug. I really like sociocracyforall.org has some really good resources about how to work on a team in an equitable way. So something to check out if you're trying to figure out a way to start that might be useful. But really spend that time figuring out how you want to work together, so that you can advance equity work in an equitable way. Walk the walk.
Yeah, not to be so kind of hammering away on this systems thing, right? But like I really would love to live in a world that wasn't, based on systems rooted in individualism and racism and scarcity, but to live in a world that was, rooted in love and kindness and interconnection, right? And abundance. And so, I think there's some real power in trying to inculcate those values and what you would like the society to feel like in yourself and in your immediate community. What does it look like to truly accept yourself, to leave every relationship that you interact in feeling more full, more connected, more in community. I think those are real shifts in kind of how we carry ourselves day to day. And so I can get pessimistic about the longevity of the anti-racist project, but then I look at that individual work and internal immediate community work, and I see lots of opportunity to chip away, and so I would offer that as my kind of advice. And I guess the other thing would be expose yourself, right? Like I really believe that I will not stop learning, and that will be because I continue to seek to be in relationship and in community. And so if just get out there and meet people and experience things, and you will understand the complexity of these systems and the beauty of this world and the unfairness of the inequities that we face.
I love that. Expose yourself. I'm putting it on a t-shirt. Just three things really quick. The first thing, if you know me, I love a good t-shirt. It's okay to move slow. And it's okay that if you move too fast, you can start back over. The other thing, honestly, for people of color on the call, I do want to invite you to unlearn white cultural norms, because I think sometimes when we hear anti-racist and bias, we immediately go to ways that white people show up in our organizations. And when we do that, sometimes we forget that we are also reinforcing white supremacy and white cultural norms. I know I do sometimes. So maybe it's not y'all, but I know sometimes I am reinforcing the things I've been taught. And I have to unlearn those things. And finally, I guess my mic drop moment, if this work feels really easy, you're doing it wrong. So when you start to just feel like, oh, I got this, you're doing it wrong. Go back. You're probably doing it all wrong. Thank you.
Never trust a confident anti-racist.
Another t-shirt, child, another t-shirt.
I just listening to all the comments and having the opportunity to be on this call today, and just coming out of COVID and being able to just reconnect. What's really coming up for me is how important it is to recognize that we're all differently situated in this work. So we all have different strengths and different opportunities to influence. And I think sometimes folks doing in this work, we don't always recognize the challenges that others have in doing the work, and also how by better connecting and knowing what each other is doing, it actually supports all of us. So recognizing that we're differently situated, recognizing that I believe we are where we are for a purpose, because we have different things that we can bring to a particular system to drive change in a way that somebody can't. So what Diversity and Resilience is doing, what Greater Milwaukee Foundation do, what all of you are doing actually helps to shift that external environment for me in a large organization that I can't reach all 10,000 people with a message. But as long as we're all working collectively and starting to do this shift in a greater environment, that also helps that internal change piece. Is interconnected. So everything we're doing, Benjamin said, we are interconnected. We don't always know what those interconnections are, but let's send each other that love and that energy and support for what we're doing invisibly her. Keep these conversations going, be aware of each other, support each other. We got plenty of other arguments, plenty other battles to fight versus, um, just not recognizing what each of us are contributing to the work and contributing to this larger environmental change that needs to shift in order to really move um, justice and come to a anti-racist society and truly thriving communities for everyone. That's my vision. We in a country like we live in, why can't everybody thrive?
I'm going to take a deep sigh because I am elated that I have got a chance to spend the last 90 minutes with each of you. This has been beautiful. I encourage each of you, including myself, I'm a part of the beloved community, that we encourage each other, as Dr. Greer said, and we continue this conversation. So I'm going to turn it back to Joseph for some closing remarks. And again, thank you all so much for joining us.
So this is the part of the program, if we were together, we could sort of acknowledge, applause, raise hands, etc. So I just want to start with thanks to all of those folks who are part of the program today, including Greg Wesley, Kenyatta Sinclair, Dr. Greer Jordan, Glenna Holstein, Kenisha Phelps, Justin Roby, and Benjamin Porter. So thank you to all of you for sharing your experiences, your learnings, all of the work that you're doing related to dismantling racism within your organizations. And to all of you who joined us this morning, we hope that today's program shared different ideas for how your organization might advance this work internally towards dismantling racism on a path towards racial equity and inclusion. As we heard today, there's no single path or single solution, but instead it requires us all to act with intention, resilience, and open minds and hearts as we advance this work within our organizations, wherever we may find ourselves in this journey. So as follow-up to today's program, all of you will be receiving an email with a link to the recording, which we encourage you to share with others. Let's expand this network, others who might be interested. We also would love to see you for our A Milwaukee for All series, which is kicking off in June. We're very excited to be welcoming virtually Edgar Villanueva, the author of Decolonizing Wealth, to Milwaukee on Friday, June 24th. And then Tanya Allen, president of the McKnight Foundation, on Friday, October 28th. So these sessions will share ideas, strategies, education as we advance racial equity and inclusion within our work, including thinking more broadly about philanthropy. So please watch your inboxes. You'll find all of this information on social media and on our website. So we hope that you will join us. To all of our agency endowment partners on the webinar today, thank you for your partnership, your investment, and your trust in the foundation. As many as you know, we've had some transition at the foundation on our team, and I'm very excited to share that we recently hired a gentleman. His name is Emmanuel Rios, who will be joining us in the role of philanthropic advisor for agency endowment. So we look forward to introducing you to Emmanuel over the coming weeks and months as he gets settled in and onboards into that role here at the foundation. In the interim, please feel free to reach out with any questions following today's event, and if there are other ways that we might be of service to your organizations. So thank you and best wishes for a great day on this beautiful spring day in Milwaukee. Thank you very much.